They called it a village, not a hospital, not an asylum, a village. 2,000 acres of rolling farmland, just 40 miles north of Manhattan, where the disabled would live in small stone cottages, tend crops and be cared for by the finest doctors in the country. That was the promise of Letchworth Village. What no one planned for was what would happen when the village worked too well, when the patients kept arriving and the funding did not. The man behind that promise never saw it fail. William Pryor Letchworth made his fortune in the saddle and carriage industry in 19th century New York. Then, at 50 years old, he walked away from all of it. He never went back. A devout Quaker, he devoted the rest of his life to one cause: reforming how New York treated its most vulnerable. Soon after, he was appointed president of the State Board of Charities, and over the next 3 decades he traveled the country and across Europe, visiting institutions for the mentally ill, the epileptic, and disabled children. What he found disgusted him. Overcrowded almshouses, crumbling asylums built to warehouse people, not help them. So he proposed something no state had attempted: a self-sustaining village. Not one imposing building, but small 2-story cottages grouped together like a college campus, surrounded by farmland and open air. Patients would grow their own food, tend livestock, and learn skills. The architecture would be warm and deliberate: stone walls, arched windows, columned entrances. Everything about the design was meant to feel like a community, not a cage. After decades of advocacy, New York State approved his plan in 1907. They acquired 2,000 acres in the hamlet of Thiels in Rockland County, nestled among the rolling hills near Harriman State Park. William Pryor Letchworth was 86 years old. He lived long enough to know the village would carry his name. He did not live to see it open. He died in 1910, 1 year before the first patients arrived. When Letchworth Village admitted its first residents in 1911, it was everything he had envisioned. Over 130 buildings stretched across the property: dormitories, a hospital, dining halls, workshops, places of worship. It had its own power plant and its own fire department. The campus sat at the intersection of 3 towns, Haverstraw, Thiels, and Stony Point, and it functioned less like an institution than like a small, self-governing town. Patients farmed the land and raised pigs, chickens, and cattle. They grew enough crops to feed the entire population. They made toys and sold them at Christmastime. The facility doubled as a research institution, hosting visiting physicians from across the United States and Europe. Letchworth wasn't just housing patients. It was advancing the science of care. At its peak, the village employed roughly 10,000 people from the surrounding communities. Almost every family in North Rockland had someone working behind those walls. The residents weren't hidden away. Locals knew them, saw them around town, considered them part of the fabric of the community. One former employee who worked in the cafeteria during the 1970s later recalled a loving, compassionate environment. The patients she saw every day, she said, felt happy and secure. For a time, Letchworth Village was exactly what its namesake had dreamed it would be, and that reputation is precisely what was destroyed. Because the story of how Letchworth fell apart contains a detail that most people have never heard, one that makes the entire history of this place harder to look away from. If you already know what I'm talking about, put it in the comments. If you don't, stay with me. By 1935, barely 24 years after opening, Letchworth Village had reached a capacity of 3,000 patients. Capacity. New arrivals kept coming, many of them transferred from overwhelmed facilities like Bellevue Hospital in New York City. The staff pleaded for more funding. Not much changed. But the state did have a plan. On Staten Island, construction was underway on a brand new facility called Willowbrook State School. It was designed specifically to relieve the overcrowding at Letchworth and other state institutions. The building was finished. The beds were ready. And then the United States entered World War II. Before Willowbrook accepted a single patient, the United States Army commandeered the facility. The institution that was supposed to rescue Letchworth was turned into a military installation overnight. The patients who were supposed to be transferred had nowhere to go. The overcrowding at Letchworth did not just continue, it accelerated. By 1944, residents were being housed in buildings that were never designed as dormitories. Hallways, storage rooms, any space with a floor and a roof. The small stone cottages built to hold 70 patients were crammed far beyond their limits, and the place had become overcrowded. The village model depended on space, on open air, on dignity. All three were disappearing. Then, in the mid-1940s, a photojournalist named Irving Haberman managed to gain access to the facility. What he captured on film was the first time the outside world saw Letchworth as it actually was. Patients, many of them children, naked and filthy, crammed into bare day rooms with no clothing, no bedding, and almost no staff in sight. Residents slept on mattresses thrown directly onto concrete floors. The photographs were visceral. They made it into the press. People saw them, and nothing happened. No investigations, no new funding, no reforms. The public looked, and then the public looked away. But something else was happening behind Letchworth's walls. Something that had nothing to do with neglect and everything to do with why this institution's story is unlike any other. In the late 1940s, a Polish-born immunologist named Hilary Koprowski was working at a laboratory just a few miles from Letchworth Village. Koprowski had spent years chasing something the world desperately needed: an oral vaccine against polio. The disease was paralyzing hundreds of thousands of children every year. There was no cure, there was no prevention, and Koprowski believed he had found one. He had tested the vaccine on himself in January of 1948. It didn't kill him. Now he needed to know if it would work on someone else. A physician at Letchworth reached out to him. The doctor feared a polio outbreak at the overcrowded facility and wanted his patients protected. Koprowski agreed to come. What happened next would put Letchworth Village on the map for a reason no one anticipated. On the 27th of February 1950, he gave the experimental vaccine to an 8-year-old boy at Letchworth Village. The boy could not consent, neither could anyone else in the institution. When the boy showed no side effects, Koprowski administered the vaccine to 19 more children. Blood tests revealed that 17 of the 20 developed antibodies against polio. The other 3 already had them. None experienced complications. The vaccine worked. When Koprowski presented these results at a major scientific conference the following year, the reaction was not what he expected. The audience was not impressed. They were horrified, not at the science. The results were genuinely promising, at the ethics. Albert Sabin, who would later develop his own oral polio vaccine, reportedly confronted Koprowski and shouted at him across the room, "Why did you do it? Why?" Here is the part that makes this story impossible to reduce to a simple tale of victims and villains. Koprowski's vaccine was never licensed in the United States. Sabin's version won out. But Sabin developed his oral vaccine using a weakened strain of the virus that he received directly from Koprowski. The trial that the scientific establishment condemned, conducted on institutionalized children who could not say yes or no, inside a facility that was already failing them, helped pave the way for one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in human history. The children at Letchworth Village were never asked. They were never credited, and most of them are buried a mile from campus in a forest, marked with nothing but a number. The vaccine changed the world. Inside Letchworth, nothing changed at all. Through the 1950s and the 1960s, Letchworth continued to swell. By the late 1960s, more than 5,000 patients occupied a facility originally built for 3,000. Many had been abandoned by their families, dropped off at the gates, and never visited again. Gone. Some became permanent wards of the state, stripped of identity, with no advocate and no one who would notice if something went wrong. The staff who remained were hopelessly outnumbered. A handful of attendants might be responsible for an entire ward. Abuse became part of the routine. Female residents were assaulted by other patients and by orderlies. Accounts described procedures performed behind closed doors that patients had no ability to refuse. The village that William Pryor Letchworth designed to preserve human dignity had become a place where dignity no longer existed. In 1965, United States Senator Robert Kennedy toured Willowbrook, the same facility the Army had commandeered 2 decades earlier, now finally operating as an institution for the disabled. Kennedy was appalled by what he found inside. He called it a snake pit, but he was not allowed to bring cameras into the buildings. His speeches about the conditions were passionate and specific. Almost nobody listened. 7 years later, a young investigative reporter named Geraldo Rivera got the opportunity that Kennedy never had. Rivera was working for WABC-TV in New York when 2 Willowbrook physicians, disgusted by what they were witnessing every day, invited him inside with a full camera crew. Rivera filmed the conditions. Children sitting in their own waste, hollow-eyed, grouped together on bare floors. One attendant managing more than 50 patients in a single room. But Rivera did not stop at Willowbrook. He traveled to Letchworth Village, accompanied by Bronx Congressman Mario Biaggi. And he made a tactical decision that would define the entire visit. He arrived 2 hours before the scheduled tour. Rivera suspected, correctly, that the staff had been ordered to clean the facility and dress the children before the cameras showed up. By showing up early, he captured Letchworth as it actually looked on an ordinary day, before anyone could stage a thing. Biaggi described the children there as living in the worst possible conditions he had ever seen in his life. The documentary aired in February of 1972 under the title Willowbrook, The Last Great Disgrace. It won the Peabody Award. It made Geraldo Rivera a household name. And it triggered a level of public outrage that decades of photographs, reports and speeches from a United States Senator had utterly failed to produce. This time, the state of New York could not look away. What followed was a slow, grinding process that took nearly a quarter century. Admissions were phased down. Residents were gradually transferred to group homes. Buildings were emptied one by one. Letchworth Village officially shut its doors in 1996. The last residents were relocated. The power plant that had run the village since 1911 was disconnected, and the campus went silent. But not everyone who spent time at Letchworth remembered it the way Rivera's cameras showed it. The woman who had worked in the cafeteria during the 70s, the one who described a loving, compassionate environment, wasn't wrong about what she experienced. She watched patients hug the attendants who cared for them. She saw a community that treated its residents not as problems to manage, but as people to know. Letchworth employed 10,000 people over its lifetime. Many of them cared deeply, stayed for decades, and built their lives around that place. The system around them is what collapsed. Whether Letchworth Village was a place of compassion or cruelty depends entirely on which building you walked into and which decade you walked in. After closing, the towns of Haverstraw and Stony Point purchased the land. A handful of buildings were repurposed. 2 became middle schools, another a courthouse. Golf courses were built across the old farmland, but most of the more than 100 structures were left exactly where they stood. Today, the neoclassical stone dormitories sit in ruin. Windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti, vines climbing the columned entrances. Beds and equipment remain inside, untouched since the day the last patients walked out. Dog walkers pass through what was once one of the most ambitious care facilities in American history. Most of them barely glance at the ruins. And then there is the cemetery. About a mile from the main campus, down a quiet stretch of Call Hollow Road in Stony Point, a small gravel lot sits at the edge of the woods. If you're not looking for it, you will drive right past. A blue rectangular sign reads, "The Old Letchworth Village Cemetery, 1914 to 1967. A short gravel path leads through the trees and opens into a hillside clearing. The graves begin immediately. Row after row of T-shaped steel markers, most of them barely a foot tall. No names, just numbers. Many of the graves are small, unmistakably the size of a child. Institutional records show that many entries are listed simply as baby boy or baby girl, followed by a surname. Families were allowed to place headstones at their own expense. Almost none ever did. Whether out of shame, poverty, or indifference, the dead were left with nothing but the number assigned to them in life. For decades, this cemetery sat hidden in the forest, with no sign marking its entrance, no path cleared to guide visitors, visited by almost no one. It was a mile from campus and concealed from the road by a wall of trees. Whether that distance was practical or deliberate is something the institution never explained. Then, in 2008, after a grassroots campaign and a painstaking search through decades-old records, a granite monument was installed at the cemetery entrance. Carved into the stone are more than 900 names listed in the order they died. Above the names, an inscription reads, "Those who shall not be forgotten." Beside the monument sits a bench. Its inscription reads, "Giving names to souls forgotten no longer." But here is the final detail. The names on the memorial cannot be matched to the numbered markers in the ground. The records that might have connected a name to a grave number are gone or incomplete. The people who lived and died at Letchworth Village were stripped of their identities so thoroughly that even now, even after their names have been recovered and carved into stone, no one can say with certainty which number belongs to which person. Community members still visit. They leave flowers on the small graves, stones, stuffed animals. They come for people they never knew, because for most of the 20th century, nobody came at all. If this story stayed with you, I would like to hear which part hit the hardest. Leave it in the comments. I read every one.